What I'm setting up a cage for today, I never actually imagined I'd find something like this down here. This is a temporary cage, and its future inhabitant, a wild-caught baby sulcata named Puddles. If that's something you find interesting, stick around. Great, thanks for hanging out. Now, let me tell you the story of where Puddles came from. We had a tropical system move in from the Sea of Cortez, which is between the main part of Mexico and Baja California, which really from here, I think it's like 70 miles south. So from time to time we get leftover tropical storms. So it caused torrential downpours out here in the desert, which happens often enough. And that also causes the washes to fill up, and it also, because the soil has so little biomatter in it, it's just almost all silicate based, it doesn't absorb water very well. So water tends to pool and then flow. Our neighbors texted us because they wanted a tortoise identification. And we went over there, lo and behold, next to a receding flow was this little guy. This is a baby Sulcata tortoise. You can see it barely has a single growth ring. If I flip it over, it still, has an umbilicus showing, and it of course still has the egg tooth. Where I live, from time to time, people do see large tortoises. They post on Facebook. So this appears to be the progeny of an escaped pet tortoise, making it a wild-caught baby Sulcata. The name Puddles comes from the fact that it was found next to a water flow or a really big moving puddle. And one of the girls that found it, that's the name that she gave it, and I think it fits, so we're going to go with that. I may keep this, or if their family agrees that it's a good idea, I will help them keep this tortoise, but for right now, I'm just setting up a little enclosure to temporarily house this guy. Of course, this enclosure would be good for it for, several months, maybe even a year as it grows. Having been introduced to Puddles, let me show you what I'm doing down here. Let me go ahead and put Puddles down for a moment. This is going to be a pretty simple setup. I just got some cocoa poured here. I poured about a half gallon of warm water in here. You can see what it did. Made that for me. I've got some topsoil from an old unused cage, and inside this topsoil are roly-polies, they're a type of isopod. There's some dwarf white isopods in here. There's a couple little worms in here, and springtails. So there's everything in here I need to seed something to be bioactive, which of course is how I prefer to have all of my enclosures that have a substrate on them. I like to have the little cleanup crews working inside of them. I've also got some peat moss over here. And what this does is it helps to lower the pH, which in turn raises the acidity. Raising acidity discourages spore, mold, fungal growth. It doesn't completely stop it, but it does a pretty good job at keeping it at bay. And it's also really good for the tortoise's shell. Even though it's going to be on a slightly moist substrate on the lower levels, by having that lower pH at higher acidity, it's less likely to get any kind of fungal infection on its shell. This concept is similar to the little turtle-shaped sulfur blocks you can get for your water turtles when they start to develop a fungal infection. But instead of lowering the pH of the water, we're just going to do the same thing to the soil with the same end effect. Although this is more preventative than reactive. I'll go ahead and set this up. We'll put Puddles in here, and Puddles may join my herd, or he may be the first tortoise for some neighbors of mine who, they've never had a tortoise. With my help, I'm a neighbor. They should have no problem keeping this little guy healthy, and either here or a few houses down, there's going to be a very strong, healthily growing sulcata in the near future. I've said this before, the best way to mix your soil up is with your bare hands. It's also fun to just play in the dirt. And again, this is a pretty temporary, quickly put together, so I didn't put my irrigation system in here because I'm just going to reuse this eventually once this tortoise either outgrows this enclosure or it goes outside or goes to its new family. But for right now, this is a pretty good setup for this little guy. So now Puddles is going in here. And to keep him safe from nosing dogs, stupid cats, I got this lid made for this enclosure. I'm going to put this in my primary tortoise room because in there I have places where there are UV lights set up and get a great dose of UV radiation for my Zoom Med T5 bulbs that I have hanging up in there. So next, I'm going to show you what this tortoise's first meal is going to be. This guy is so small, I don't think it's even had its first meal yet. For this tortoise and any hatchling tortoise I get, and also when I get new acquisitions, I like to give them as much of a head start, and with babies especially, introduce them to as much variety as possible. I've got critical care. This is primarily intended for sick animals. It's super nutrient packed, but this is also a great way to head start a baby tortoise. It's primarily hay with a bunch of added vitamins in it. Now, if you didn't have critical care, you can do another thing that I like to try. At the bottom of hay, and when it's all chopped up, you get these little hay fines. You know, crunching these up and mixing them in is a really good way to early on introduce your tortoises to hay, because if they don't eat hay from the beginning, they may take years before they develop a taste for it. Another thing that I'm going to add today is this. This is Missouri fines. This is at the bottom of a Missouri bag, or if you dump it into a plastic bin like I do, when you get to the bottom, this is the little crumbles that come out. We're going to use some of this and add it into today's meal. Because there's so much vitamin enrichment in the critical care, we're not going to use the calcium nor the multivitamin. But I wanted to make sure people see these to know that these are used very often. Whenever I stop using this, then that's when calcium and the multivitamins will become important to be added to its food. If this tortoise seemed unhealthy to me, I would use this electrolyte soak. 1 scoop is good for an entire gallon of water. Understanding osmosis and diffusion, I know that there is no way a tortoise, through its skin, is going to absorb any of the ingredients of this, besides just the water. But if the tortoise drinks while he's soaking, then he has a better chance to ingest this stuff than if he didn't have this in the water at all. It's not going to hurt it, and at the most, it could only help it. Now, this little guy doesn't need this at the moment, but I just thought I'd show you guys some of the tools I use for baby tortoises and or new acquisitions. So, of course, we have some lettuces here, a little, some red leaf lettuce, some baby stuff. This is just out of spring mix. So what I'm going to start doing is taking some of this and cutting it up into little fine shreds. This is a wild baby tortoise. It could very easily tear off little pieces of this plant. Something that I found is that tortoises get, I guess you could call it, discouraged relatively easily. And what I mean by that is when there's something large that they're trying to take a bite off of, a lot of times they give up if it's too big for them. Eventually they get large enough and they're eating entire heads of lettuce. But as babies, if you give them shredded up food, it's easier for them to ingest and they're more likely to ingest it. Critical care, you mix 1 part critical care to 2 parts of water. So I'm going to take, it's a small tortoise, he's only 24 grams. I'm just going to take just maybe a half teaspoon here. Put it in there. Half teaspoon. I've got a cup of warm water here. In fact, I may make it a little bit thicker than recommended. When you mix this up, it turns into basically a paste. The solid matter is mostly just ground up hay. It's very, very, very vitamin enriched. It has almost a licorice smell to it. Now we're going to take this and put it over here. It's like a little side of tortoise wasabi. Now I'll get some of this put this in here. I'm only going to add a little bit of water because this is very absorbent. Tiny bit. And what the heck, let's go ahead and put a little bit of these hay fines in here. Now there's actually a good chance that this tortoise is so young that it may not even eat any of this. But we're going to give it the best chance it has to start off with. You'll notice this bowl is really big. You're probably wondering, why do I use such a giant bowl for such a little tortoise? Well, that's so that the tortoise can fit in here with the food. You see, I've also noticed when it comes to that discouragement, when it's too hard or too tough to eat, that when they have a bowl that they have to kind of come up and teeter-totter over, they're less likely to sit there and eat for a long period of time and really fill themselves up. They'll bite what they can reach and then just move on. So if you put a baby tortoise in a bowl big enough for it, well, then it can sit there all day and eat at its leisure. Let's take this over to Puddles and see if the little critter has an appetite yet. For the time being, this is where Puddles is going to live. You can see I put the enclosure on top of Andromeda's indoor nighttime enclosure. You can very clearly see the bright UVB light shining down on this little guy, and there's no heat lamp because the ambient temperature in here is typically pretty warm. Even it is a bit low, but it's usually between 85 and 87 degrees in here, which in most tortoises is perfect. Now, let us see if Puddles here is interested in eating.